This is the 1541 Ultimate 2 Plus for the Commodore 64. That sounds impressive, so what? Nope, wait, stop. You've already done that one. Hey guys, welcome back. In today's bit, we'll be taking a look at some of the new features and enhancements in the latest firmware for the 1541 Ultimate 2 Plus and Ultimate 64. If you're just joining us, I strongly encourage you to check out the introduction video to the U2 Plus first, as we've already covered many of its amazing features and we'll only be looking at what's new in today's video. You may be asking, hey, where's the video on the Ultimate 64 you said you'd make? Well, as you can see, I still haven't built it. I'm still waiting to get the new case from individual computers since Pixel Wizard stopped selling them last year. I was also hoping to have the Indiegogo keycaps that I backed before making the build video. But don't worry guys, I haven't forgotten about it. Before we dive into the new features, let me just say that this is not a comprehensive list, as there are simply too many bug fixes and enhancements to cover them all. I will try and cover all the major changes though. First things first, we need to download the latest firmware from the website. The link's in the description. Unzip the file onto a USB stick, fire up your Ultimate device, then kick off the update. An important note is that firmware 3.10 reorganizes how data is stored in flash memory, so if you have anything important on your device's file system, make sure to back it up before starting the update. Once the update was complete and the system rebooted, I ran into my first problem. The freebie Micro Center USB stick that I'd been using since I got my 2 Plus was no longer recognized. The UI would either lock up entirely or it would get this error message. Others have reported a similar problem, and an issue is open on the project's GitHub page for it. At the time of filming, it looks like the cause of the issue has been identified. For the time being, I've switched to a different thumb drive and everything is fine with this one. Let's start with a quick look at some of the user interface enhancements. The first is recursive deleting from within the menu. This is a powerful feature, but it can also be dangerous. You are given a chance to confirm your action, but there's no specific warning that everything inside the directory will be erased, so be careful. The next new feature is the ability to delete multiple files all at once. As with copy-paste, you can select any number of files with the spacebar and then remove them with the delete key, also known as Shift Insert. A small change is that the existing F3 help screen has been added to the configuration menu, so it's no longer limited to just file navigation. On top of that is a brand new F4 menu that shows you the status of your Ultimate device, including the configuration and state of your drives, cartridges, RAM expansion, and Ultimate command interface. This is a handy place to get an overview of how things are currently configured instead of having to poke through 2 or 3 separate submenus to find that information. A major change in this update is how cartridges and ROM images are handled. Unlike with older revisions, the fast load, freezer, and utility cartridges are no longer part of the firmware's default installation. It was decided that they were taking up too much space on the device, and it was unlikely that every user needed every one of the cartridges, so they're now optional. The new flash file system will show up at the root of your device and can be used to store cartridges, ROMs, and anything else you want. By removing the cartridges from the default installation, more flash storage is now available on your device. About 1.5 megabytes on the 2 Plus and 3.5 megabytes on the U64. As an example, you can store your most commonly used programs and disk images to the flash memory, so they'll always be available to your system even when you don't have any USB storage attached. Here, I'll use Commodore C to copy a file from my USB drive and Commodore V to paste it into flash memory. To restore the utility carts you wish to use, navigate to where you unzip the firmware on your USB device. Here, you'll find a selection of images you can install. Any file in the standard Vice CRT format is supported. Simply utilize the Copy to Flash menu option to install the image directly to onboard storage, or you can use copy-paste as in the previous example. Once an image is located in the Flash Carts directory, it can be selected to be used at boot just as in previous firmware versions. Remember the new F4 menu from earlier? One neat feature is that it will show you when there are hardware incompatibilities in your current configuration. For instance, when utilizing an EasyFlash cartridge, it's not possible to also have a RAM expansion or the Ultimate command interface active, so they've automatically been disabled as shown here. The update notes mention that the Zaxxon cartridge is now supported. I wasn't even aware that it didn't previously work, but I've never tried it either, so might as well give it a go. It seems slightly different from the disc version that I played as a kid. Specifically, I remember that in the open space section, that a little X would appear and a tone would sound when you had target lock on an enemy plane. That feature seems to be absent in this version. Regardless, the cart seems to work absolutely fine with no issues that I could see. While we're at it, let's take a look at the Super Zaxxon cartridge too. This one is known not to work with some replacement PLAs, but this bread bin I'm using for video capture has a plankton, which should be fine. I've never tried it, so why not take a look now? It seems to me like Super Zaxxon is more or less the exact same game with slightly different graphics. The layout of the playfield, sound effects, and gameplay mechanics appear to be largely identical. Somewhat different is that instead of a space scene, you're now shooting ships in a tunnel. I'm not sure why there are at least 3 different versions of this game, but I guess it's good to have options. I wish they had used more than just the noise waveform for the game effects, though.
RGCD presents a Pirates of Zanzibar production. Monstro Giganto.
Another new feature in this update is Gmod 2 cartridge support. Like EasyFlash, Gmod 2 is a large format cartridge that implements internal bank switching. In this case, it offers 512 KB of flash ROM with a 2K EEPROM that allows the Commodore to write data to the cart such as saved games, high scores, etc. One title that utilizes this cartridge format is Monstro Giganto, which was released in 2021 by Pirates of Zanzibar.
Round 2, fight.
The game features a high score table that is written to the cart's EEPROM. Like EasyFlash, you have to write the cart image back to your USB drive to save any changes that were made.
UII wins. Game over.
The F4 menu shows that the EEPROM has been modified or is dirty and needs saving. Here, I'll use the F5 menu to save a new CRT file with the modified high score data. After saving and reloading the new image, I found that the high score data was not preserved correctly. I tested this several times, but was unable to get it to save and restore properly. When I dug a little deeper, I found this notice in the documentation that calls out a specific corner case where Gmod2 EEPROM data will not be saved. My best guess is that this is what I was running into, and it probably has to do with the way the game was implemented. Unfortunately, I don't currently have any other Gmod2 based software to test with that uses save states. Now, let's move on to the big news. As of this update, the Ultimate 2 Plus and Ultimate 64 now have full 1571 and 1581 drive emulation. Guys, this is huge. That said, the documentation barely mentions how they've been implemented, so let's do some testing on our own, shall we? Let's start with the small things. Each of the 3 drive types have their own simulated sound, including a new disk swap effect. Next, both virtual floppies now have simulated disk sounds, not just drive A. Finally, you can customize the default drive sounds with your own, if that's the sort of thing that floats your boat. A convenient new feature is that when you attempt to mount a D71 or D81 image on a 1541, for example, the UI will prompt you and automatically change to the correct drive type for the selected file. When mounting a disk this way, the change is only temporary and isn't stored in flash, so your original drive settings will be preserved the next time you cycle the power. Just like with the cartridge images, you'll need to load your alternative kernels and drive ROMs into the onboard flash to use them. Like before, the UI provides an easy way to do this, either one file at a time or with a mass copy and paste. Once done, you can select the appropriate ROM for each of the 3 hardware types for both Drive A and Drive B. The documentation states that the emulated 1571 supports MFM formatted disks. That means it should work with CP/M on the Commodore 128. Let's see if that's true. What you're about to see is GeoS64 running on an unaccelerated machine, no camera tricks. Having 2 1581 drives plus a large RAM expansion is a complete game changer. There's no more swapping tiny 1541 disks. You can have all your programs, data, and a huge RAM disk all running from the Ultimate. This enables workflows that were previously not possible, such as task swapping and REU save states, all on a stock C64. If people are interested, I have been thinking of doing an entire episode on GEOS Megapatch and GDESK64. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in. Okay, time to do some benchmarking. In a previous bit, we compared a real 1541-2 to the Ultimate and found that they were nearly identical, as you would expect from cycle-accurate emulation. Let's do the same for the new 1571 and 1581 modes and see how they compare to the real hardware. We'll only be looking at program loading performance and won't be testing things like copy protection or other drive-specific functions. I've prepared D71 and D81 images that contain the CBM command software for both the 64 and 128. At 106 blocks, that's 27.5 KB for the 64 version. I've also created floppies with the same contents for both real drives. Looking good so far. Just like with the 1541, the Ultimate's 1571 performance was almost identical to the real hardware. For completeness, let's benchmark both real and emulated drives with JiffyDOS next. Now this is a bit of a surprise. One would generally expect the emulated drive to be slightly faster due to not having to spin up the disk or seek to a track. But in this case, the transfer rate of the real drive with JiffyDOS was significantly higher. Let's run the same set of tests on the 1581 and see what happens there. Wow, look at that 1581 performance. Once again, the transfer rates are almost identical using the stock kernel routines, and similar to the 1571 test, the physical drive bests the emulated drive when JiffyDOS is added to the equation. At the moment, I don't have a good working theory as to why we're seeing these results. I feel like we should look at the 128 as well to determine if the fast serial bus mode is supported. I won't be testing burst mode as that requires special code to bypass the kernel routines. In the interest of time, I'm not going to show all 16 of the tests I recorded, so we'll jump straight to the results instead. So, what conclusions can we draw from testing the 1571 in 128 mode? Well, for starters, fast mode seems to work just fine, as the transfer rates demolish those we saw in 64 mode. It's also interesting that the speed difference between the stock kernel and Jiffy DOS are negligible. Finally, we're still seeing the real drive outperform the virtual drive in both test cases now, which is even more surprising than before. Perhaps there's some sort of upper threshold of performance we're hitting with the Ultimate 2 Plus? Let's perform the same set of 128 tests on the 1581, and then we can call it a day. Good lord, that's fast. And the results are in. One thing is clear, any way you slice it, the 1581 is fast. In 128 mode, the previous trend is reversed and the emulated drive is more performant than the physical drive in both sets of tests. So much for my theory about the upper limits of the Ultimate. Oddly, the real 1581 shows lower Jiffy DOS performance in 128 mode than in 64 mode. I really have no explanation for this at all. So, there's some interesting data here, but it's not enough to draw any real conclusions from. My methodology seems sane, but it's possible I missed something important. I wasn't happy with these results, so I went back and reran all the tests again. In doing so, I discovered there was up to a 2-second variance that occurred depending on whether the drive was already spinning and the read head was positioned on the correct track or not. This held true for both the physical and Ultimate drives, which was a surprise, but also a testament to the accuracy of the emulation. When you're dealing with sub 4-second load times, 2 additional seconds can throw off the entire calculation. So with that in mind, here are the new numbers taken with each drive spun up and the read head on the first track of the file. Does this new data help answer our questions from before? Not really. The only real differences are that the 1581 Jiffy DOS performance in 64 mode now more closely matches 128 mode, and some of the deltas between Ultimate and real drive performance shrunk. Let's look at the difference one more time. Apart from taking a larger number of samples and averaging the results, I'm not sure what I would do differently next time. Clearly, there are some inconsistencies in performance between the real and emulated drives, and not always in the manner one would expect. Anyway, it was a fun experiment, and I'd love to hear in the comments if you have any thoughts on these results. As I mentioned earlier, there are quite a few bug fixes and other small enhancements that we didn't get a chance to look at today. The changelog lists everything, although you'll have to be intimately familiar with some of the issues to make sense out of the more technical fixes. Regardless, this is a fantastic update for existing Ultimate owners, so thanks to Gideon and everyone else who contributed for all their hard work, making these great devices even more capable. So there we have it, the latest features for the Ultimate 2 Plus and 64. Back in episode 25, I made the case that the Ultimate represents an amazing value proposition, and with the inclusion of these new features, most notably 1571 and 1581 support, it's gotten that much better. I hope you enjoyed this bit, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.